Hi everyone, this is theme 1 video, 22nd of October, the end of the half term. We've got half term next week, and I understand you've been doing rational decision making, but you also did irrational decision making, sort of 1.2.1 and 1.2.10 at the same time. That's fair enough. Next slide. So, some definitions. Neoclassical economists developed in the late 19th century. Neoclassical economics assumes economic agents are rational and stems from the marginal revolution. You're going to see a bit more of that in a minute. I mean, you know, maybe it's easier 100 years down the line, but it does seem amazing they just assume people are rational. I mean, I think you can all think of 2 or 3 examples straight off the bat of people being very irrational in current times, and that must have been the case then anyway. Utility, the satisfaction or benefit derived from consuming goods or services. You're going to see that very clearly soon as well. Profit, total revenue minus total cost. This is for a business. You're going to do loads on this in theme 3 this time next year. But for the time being, I think we can all accept that little formula there. Total cost is fairly obvious. Total revenue. Revenue is the word, if you haven't come across it, that refers to the sort of sales in a way. So if you were running a market store in Stratford and you sold, I might as well write this down, and you sold 100 units, so that's Q, and the price was I don't know, £5, then your total revenue is just 500. But that is not profit, because you might have costs. You may have bought them all in for 300 quid or something. So your profit is 500 minus 300, which equals 200. So you can see there the revenue is 500, the cost 300, the profit 200. So people sometimes get muddled between revenue and profit. Anyway, that's as much as you need to know. Next, social welfare, a measure of individual preferences but at a collective level. You're again going to see a lot more of this, especially when you do externalities. Social welfare, maybe think of it in terms of welfare for society, social society. So you're looking at adding up all the welfare of all the individuals, but at a collective level, i.e. the whole economy. Next slide. Okay, economic agents. Rational decision makers aim to maximize. You might want to pause and think about this, but you hopefully know the answers. Consumers, it's going to be utility. Producers, it's going to be the profit we were just talking about. Government is probably going to be that social welfare we were just talking about. And workers, well, I suppose this is like trade workers believe this as well, but that's part of the reason we have trade unions. They club all the workers together to be more powerful, to try and maximize hopefully the wage rate or maybe working conditions. They're the 2 things that unions try and do as well as possible. Okay, next slide. Bit of fun here, filling in lots of nice numbers. So you've got, it looks like quantity of units of whatever it is consumed. You've got figures for marginal utility. So that marginal is really important, by the way. You're going to do lots of marginal. Next, I don't like that colour. I'm going to go back to red. Marginal. This is because you're going to have marginal cost, marginal revenue, marginal profit, all these things. And essentially what marginal means in each of those cases, and marginal utility here, means it's the extra, in this case, utility from consuming, in this case, different for costs and things, one extra unit. That's really important. One extra. So we consume 1 extra unit here, number 1, and that's the extra utility. The second unit we consume, we only get 250. Notice the total is still rising, but the extra you get from each unit is getting slightly smaller every time. Right down to the 8th one, we get absolutely no extra utility. So in terms of total, you probably filled this in. 1 unit, you get 300. Second unit, you get an extra 250. So we're now on what, 550? Third one, you get an extra 220. So we're now on 770. Next one, extra 160. So that's 930, is it? And so on. And I think on the next slide, you've got all the answers. Next slide. There we go. Just keep doing what I was doing there. Notice it gets really bad down in minus 250. That's almost like you had the 9th unit and it was so, you had so many of whatever it is that actually you would have been better off not having it. So your total utility falls. Next slide. Okay, it looks like you did something like this next, and you probably plotted the total utility. Maybe you had sort of 300 down here up to, you know, what is it, about 1,000 up here, 1,100. And so what is it? It's sort of going up and it's sort of slowing down, and it goes down at the end. I'm just sketching it here. And then maybe in red you did this, the margin which starts at 300 and goes down and down and down, ends up at 0, and then it goes slightly negative. Fine. And on the next slide, I think there we are. It's all plotted nicely. You should start to be already seeing the relationship with what's going on down here and what's going on up here. I won't spoil it yet. Next slide. You then had a bunch of questions here, and what I've done, next slide, here are the questions, all small, and I'm going to try and answer these questions using diagrams here on the left. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put marginal utility on this one and total utility on this one, so that because the problem about the previous diagram is because you had 300 down here and 1,000 up here, this was all a bit rubbish and small, wasn't it? So what I want to do is be in a situation where you can see the full effect. So if I start here at 300, you're going to get a better effect, aren't you? You're going to have 300 here down to 0 here, minus 250 is right down here somewhere actually, isn't it? And so essentially what you've got is, how quickly is it going down? I mean, it's not constant, but roughly you're doing this. It's actually not like that at all, is it? It goes down 50, then it goes down 30, then it goes down 60, then it goes down 60, then it goes down 50, and so on. So it's a little bit of a wobbly line, but it's roughly doing that. Now, total utility, we can again go right up to 1,100 here, and this starts, well, I suppose they've got 0, you've got 1 here, it starts at 300, and it goes up at a very fast rate, then at a slower rate, and then it hits a max, and it just goes down at the end, basically because you're that extra unit here, which I probably should draw again, it's just 1 unit, isn't it? That extra unit here is negative, so this just drops a bit. But the key thing is, notice here, when marginal utility equals 0, total utility is a maximum. And hopefully that makes sense. If you understand that, that's going to be really useful, because that comes back when you do marginal revenue and total revenue next year, marginal cost and total cost, although as you'll see the diagram doesn't quite work as well. Marginal profit and total profit, the principle is the same. If you don't add any utility, if the marginal is 0, you're not adding any, then the total doesn't go up. And also, as the marginals get smaller and smaller, the total rises at a slower rate. So when you have very high rates of marginal here, look, we've got a steep curve. Then when the marginal rates get lower, we've got a flatter curve. That should make sense. Anyway, we can now answer these questions. At what point is total utility maximized? Well, when marginal utility equals 0, we've just answered that, which is at unit 8. What happens to total utility if the marginal utility of the light item is positive? Well, total utility must rise if marginal utility is positive. Essentially, we're talking about all of these units here. All of those, the marginal is positive, so guess what? It keeps rising, doesn't it? Total utility keeps rising. What happens to total utility if the marginal utility of the last item is negative? Right, well, that's this one here. So the total falls. So if marginal utility is less than 0, total utility will fall. Explain the concept of diminishing marginal utility using the above example. Well, yeah, the above example, I'm not sure what that is actually, but I think on the next slide there's a really good example. Hang on a sec, I'll go to the next slide. Yeah, Miss Fiji Waller's got this really good example here. Diminishing marginal utility, as more units of a particular good is consumed, the less utility or satisfaction each additional good provides. That's essentially what you've seen in the data. But the example here is maybe coffee. And if the individual, you know, first cup of coffee, a bit tired in the morning, more alert, focused, better productivity, as it says there. By the third cut, still keeping you perky, as it were, but it's not going to be as good as the first one. And by the seventh, you might even get to the point where you've got the shakes, and it's actually negative marginal utility, and your total utility falls. The one I always see in books is about alcohol, which of course you 16-year-olds would know nothing about. But the first pint is very nice, the second's never as good as the first, the third's never as good as the second, and so on. And then you might get to the point where whatever number pint it is, where not only does your marginal utility, not is it not positive, it's maybe negative, like, I don't know, throwing up. But that's a pretty gruesome example. But virtually anything just pick something that you consume that you personally like. I don't know, like a Mars bar. You have one, it's great. You have a second one, never as good as the first. And the third one, never as good as the second. So your total utility is rising, but at a much slower rate, diminishing rate, hence diminishing marginal utility. But the total is rising at a diminishing rate because the rate is the marginal utility. Hope that makes sense. And I suppose a lot of when you start doing demand after half term, you're going to see how you essentially derive the demand curve from the principle of diminishing marginal utility. And where do we get that principle from? Well, it's just what you see around you. I mean, it's common sense that when you're consuming something, the second is not as nice as the first, the third is not as nice as the second, and so on. Hopefully that it's just common sense. Next slide. Now Miss Fijiwala then had this example of payday loans. I had to check with her on this. Apparently, if people were shown this picture you can see in front of you, they were and then or they were shown that one, the green one, where you've got a bit of information about the interest you'll be paying. The ones who saw the green one were 15% more likely to never get a payday loan again. Understandably, look, you've got information there. Look at the interest on the payday loan. It's ridiculous. What's that? $15 on a $100 loan? Is that per? It looks like it's per week. I think it is. God damn, it's terrible, isn't it? And when you work out the annual interest rate for that, you're paying over 10% a week. Well, that times by 50, that's 500%. But then it's compound interest, so it's much more than 500%. In fact, the example here, 1 month is 90 quid. That's nearly 100% in a month. So times that by 12, you've got over 1,000%. And then there's compound. So it's really bad. And notice credit card, even assuming a 20% APR, which is not great, look how much less the interest is. So you see that information and you rationally think, why would I ever get a payday loan? Good point. Next slide. Oh, nudge unit. I remember when this came out. I've read this book as well, Thaler. It's really good. Cameron quite liked it as well and started this nudge unit. As it says there, people are not the rational economic actors of neoclassical theory, but can be influenced by choice architecture into making better choices in their own interests, e.g. prompting on time tax payments, approaching job centres, organ donation, turning up to court, etc. The organ donation one, that's a really classic case. Until quite recently, the way it worked is that you had to log, well, it wasn't even online in those days. You had to sort of go to Dodd and say, yeah, I'll be an organ donor, and you had a little card in your wallet and stuff like that. Firstly, it's now all online, but more importantly, they've done it the other way around. Rather than saying, do you want to be an organ donor? They've said, everyone is an organ donor, but you don't have to be, but you have to opt out. And because people are really rubbish, they just don't do it. So you end up with lots more people being organ donors rather than in the other case where there are lots of people who wanted to be organ donors, they just never got around to putting their name down. I mean, there's lots of pros and cons in this thing. For pros, more organ donors, but the bad thing is there might be some people who genuinely don't want to give their organs but just never got around to it. I mean, my view is tough. It should have been more rational and organised, and it takes about 1 minute, so, or maybe 5 at most, so sort it out. Anyway, next slide. Some definitions of irrationality. Peer behaviour. Neoclassical economics assumes that individuals make free and independent choices. However, evidence suggests that they make choices which are influenced by social norms. God, there's loads of examples of this. I mean, I was just in a class the other day, and we did that 5 marker on the previous topic. I was macro, sorry. I can't remember the 5 marker. Pretty straightforward. So I got everyone to write an answer, and they wrote their answers, and I got them to mark their own answers. And I said, right, hands up who thinks I got 5. and no one put their hand up. And I said, hands up who got 4, and you could see everyone looking around going, I don't want to be the one who puts my hand up. But then, and then a couple of people put their hand up, and suddenly the other 4 or 5 people who thought they got 4 out of 5 put their hand up. It's that classic, you know, I don't want to be seen as that one that says, look at me, I got 4 out of 5. You just follow everyone else. And so, and this happens in consumption, you know. I mean, there's the classic keeping up with the Joneses. So it's a phrase. So your neighbour gets the brand new, I don't know, Volvo, Tesla probably would be a better example nowadays, electric cars. And you look around and go, oh, they've got a Tesla. So I buy a Tesla. But you didn't really want it. If you just were being rational, going, do I need a Tesla? No, I've only got 1 child. Or I have no children. I don't need a massive car. But my neighbour's got a Tesla. I'll buy a Tesla. That's not rational. Habitual behaviour. Habits and rules of thumb that can be useful when making decisions. They represent shortcuts in decision making. Although they don't maximise utility, they do save time and cognitive abilities. However, habits can also lead to addiction, whereby lack of self-control can lead to destructive decisions. Yeah, okay. So, I mean, I think we know we're talking there about alcohol, drugs, whatever. I mean, it's that example I gave earlier. It's not rational to have that 8th pint of beer. It just isn't rational. But people do it. Is it partly peer behaviour, habitual behaviour? When you're in a group, oh, do you want another pint? You know, when everyone's having another pint, you're thinking, do you know what? I just don't. But you just get on with it because it's peer behaviour. You get on it with it because it's habitual behaviour. Another really good example of this, and you'll find this when you get older, when you get an adult, you have lots of direct debits for various things. I mean, a classic one at the moment is Now TV, and what they do is it's very good. You don't get caught up in 12-month, 24-month contracts. You literally every month can decide whether you want to pay the £10 a month for whatever it is. That's Sky. It's essentially Sky Entertainment or Sky Sports, and they really hope you forget. I mean, I put a little calendar thing to remind me the day before to sort it out. But if you forget, then they'll charge you next month, and you go, oh, you look at your bank account, oh, I didn't want it next month. And it's, you know, it's habitual behaviour in a way, isn't it? They're very cleverly getting you to think, oh, right, just another month. And in fact, you don't even think that. It just happens. And you go, oh dear, I've just paid for another month. I must remember next month to actually consider whether I need it that month. But it's that classic habitual behaviour. You know, how many people stop, teachers as well, stop at Pret on the way to the LAE. Oh, I'll get my coffee. Do you want one this morning? I'll have that chocolate bar. Really? Is it just because you want one, or because you just do it every morning? Anyway, computational weakness. Neoclassical economists assume that individuals make perfect calculations. However, in reality, cognitive limits may lead to suboptimal choices. You probably talked a little bit here about that. The classic example here is the, you know, something's £9.99. It's basically £10, isn't it? And yet apparently they've done studies unbelievably. I would always think it's 1 pence less than £10, but loads of people just see the 9 and think, oh, it's 9, not 10. That's like 10% cheaper. I know. Difficult to believe, isn't it? But people are just other examples, like, I don't know, they'll sort of splash out on a coffee at Pret, you know, at whatever pounds, but then bulk at sort of, they'll be in a shopping and they're buying pods for their coffee machine at home, and they're like, oh, it's 10p more there, it's 20, I want to save 20p. Hang on, you're spending £2.50 on a coffee that's probably not as nice because it's in a cardboard carton, and yet when you're considering your coffee options at home, you're getting worried about 20 pence. It's, you know, I know people who will scour around town to get the cheapest, whatever it is, box of cornflakes, and you think, it's 20p. What are you doing? You know, your time is worth £20 an hour or more, whatever it is, whatever your job you do. But it's what people do. Next slide. Oh, and it looks like this is the last slide. It looks like Miss Fujiwara got you doing a little data response. I'm not going to go over this now. I think you probably did it in class. And anyway, those of you missed it, I don't want to give you all the answers. You have a go at that and see what you come up with. I'm sure you would have done it in class, although I don't teach this, so I don't know. Anyway, that's nearly 19 minutes. That's sort of usual fare for these videos. Hope that was helpful. After half term, I assume we're moving on to demand, supply. Hugely exciting. Have a great week. Speak to you soon. Bye.